Blue light washes over wet asphalt as sirens cry in the distance, a thin wail threading the night. Rain needles down in cold lines, drumming on patrol cars and puddles that tremble with every engine idle. Under that wash of color and sound, a man in a perfectly pressed police uniform is pushed across the hood of a cruiser. Steel cuffs close around his wrists with the finality of a door slamming shut. He doesn't thrash. He doesn't plead. He stands rooted, the still center of a storm he has seen before, the kind that arrives without introduction and assumes without evidence. Inside the precinct lobby, faces turn toward the glass, curiosity tilting heads, discomfort settling over shoulders. Some avert their eyes, some hold their breath. No one knows what, exactly, they are watching, only that it looks familiar and wrong at the same time. Across the city, a name moves through radio channels and email subjects. Rising and falling like a tide, the incoming chief has been announced. The future is already stamped into official memos. The future is the man with rain on his collarbones and calm in his eyes. But the night hasn't caught up to the news. The scene in the parking lot lives a few minutes behind the truth. And in that short distance between what is and what is known, old habits find their footing. Assumption steps forward. Authority follows it. The cuffs gleam. He lowers his gaze, not in surrender, but in a quiet audit of the moment. A system he has fed with effort, loyalty, and years is swallowing its own leader without even tasting the name. The mistake isn't just an error. It is a mirror, cut to black. Morning arrives hours earlier than the city is ready for, slipping under blinds and over rooftops with a pale, honest light. Somewhere on the south side, an alarm buzzes once and is silenced by a practiced hand. The hand belongs to a man who keeps time like a promise. He sits on the edge of the bed and breathes once, steady and deep, before the day takes its first step. Marcus Reed learned the cadence of discipline long before he learned the politics of rank. In a neighborhood where sirens were punctuation, he found rhythm in routines that could not be stolen. Laces tied tight, bed made sharp, mind cleared before the door opened. As a boy, he watched the world measure people by shortcuts and shadows. He decided early to meet every measurement with evidence. The uniform came later, not as a costume to be worn, but as a language to be spoken, one with verbs like serve and protect, and nouns like trust that too often showed up late. He worked in districts that tested patience and demanded precision. He walked beats that turned compassion into a muscle. He studied, listened, learned what fear looks like in the eyes of strangers and in the eyes of partners who had seen too much and not enough at the same time. Performance reviews read like a steady climb, cool head under pressure, high community rapport, zero tolerance for corner cutting. Officers he trained went on to train others. Initiatives he piloted reduced complaints in places where complaints felt like weather. He was promoted not because he shouted for it, but because the statistics would not stop speaking his name. With every step upward, a pattern followed him like a shadow that had memorized his stride. The first glance that did not compute. The second look that searched for someone else to address. The pause at reception desks. The slow nods of guards who were not ready for recognition to meet reality. These were minor cuts, each too small to justify an outcry, each deep enough to sting alone and ache together. He did not catalog them to save for a speech. He let them teach him how to build systems that would leave less room for them to happen again. When the offer arrived, chief of the 12th precinct, he did not imagine a parade. He pictured a building with fluorescent ceilings and frayed carpets that had listened to 1,000 arguments and apologies. He pictured a staff of veterans and rookies, loyal to the work, shaped by habits that had formed in the cracks where policy ends and people begin. He pictured culture, tangible as humidity, changing slowly at first and then all at once when the air finally moves. He could have entered with cameras and handshakes. He chose to arrive with the ordinary ceremony of a workday. No convoy, no announcement at the door. A plain uniform, the one he wore when he wanted to be a peer before he was a headline. The badge pinned precisely. The name plain and unavoidable. The ID card tucked where it always lived. The precinct looked like every precinct and like none at all. Coffee rings on forms. A bulletin board layered with notices. the newest pinned over the oldest by a thumbtack that had outlived 3 supervisors. A front desk that had seen confessions and complaints and the kind of jokes that were not funny outside these walls. The receptionist skimmed a screen. The sergeant managed a conversation with 2 radios and a phone at once. The door to administration opened and closed with the soft insistence of spring hinges. Marcus stepped through and felt the building take his weight, as if it were testing his presence before accepting it. He nodded to the first pair of eyes that met his. A small courtesy, a calibration. The eyes moved on. The path to the chief's office was a corridor of framed photos and retired commendations. Faces looked out from a timeline of eras, some stern, some smiling. The wall carried the memory of how leadership had looked here for decades. It would, starting today, look different. He did not linger. The work ahead would be done in rooms that were not on the wall. He made it 10 steps before the first friction found him. A ripple of attention behind his left shoulder, footfalls quickening. The angle change of a body moving from a neutral trajectory to an intercept. The choreography was familiar enough to name without words. Restricted area, the building seemed to whisper through signs and line breaks in the tile pattern. Identification required. Purpose stated. The rules were designed to protect the back rooms from the front world. The rules could be followed with a question asked in the right tone. The question did not arrive. What arrived was assumption, quick and efficient. A hand reached for his elbow, not roughly, but with the entitlement of a guardrail. Another hand hovered near a holster like a punctuation mark that ends a sentence before the subject is clear. Processes exist on paper. Habits exist in people. Where they do not align, culture shows itself. Marcus paused without bracing. He had no desire to escalate the theater of the moment. A badge gleamed on his chest, obvious as a streetlight. An ID card waited in his jacket, official and current. The distance between clarity and confusion was a single glance. The glance did not happen. He registered other details that trained minds always file. A cluster of recruits pretending not to stare. A veteran pretending he had not noticed. A supervisor's office with blinds tilted just enough to watch without committing to intervention. He did not harden. He did not soften. He observed. If stories are shaped by choice, then the morning shaped itself when 2 officers decided what kind of uniform they were willing to see. A uniform that fit a narrative they had rehearsed 1,000 times. A uniform that could be denied with confidence until an authority they recognized corrected them. Minutes stretched. The building listened. Somewhere, a printer warmed up and fed paper into a tray. Somewhere, a door clicked closed. In the parking lot, rain reassembled itself into the opening scene that would become the hook of this story. Destiny rearranging the weather to match the lesson. Outside, the city was already accepting the news of a new chief. Inside, the precinct was still teaching him the exact contours of the challenge he had been hired to change. He did not know yet which officers would become allies, which would resist, which would drift toward the winner as culture shifted. He did not know which processes would require a pen and which would require a hammer. He did not know how many speeches he would give, or how many moments of quiet would speak louder than any microphone. He did know this. Beginnings always tell the truth about what endings must fix. He lifted his eyes to the corridor again. To the office that would be his. To the work waiting behind a door that would not recognize him until someone told it his name. The day, already in motion, had chosen its first lesson, and the lesson was not subtle. The hallway narrowed as if the building itself were holding its breath. Every surface carried echoes. The click of boots, the hum of fluorescent tubes, the quiet shuffle of forms being signed somewhere out of sight. The sound that did not belong was metal, tightening. The weight of it found Marcus before recognition. Did hands moved with certainty, born from repetition. They did not ask. They performed. The procedure, when stripped of context, was efficient. Detain first. Explain later. The human inside the procedure disappeared like air inside machinery. Steel pressed his wrists together, cool and familiar. The texture of a lifetime spent watching systems prove their priorities. He felt the small pulse of humiliation, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that settles. A sediment of memory collecting at the base of restraint. Around him, the office carried on, the dull momentum of paperwork and caffeine stronger than discomfort. He heard the officer's breath close to his ear, smelled the coffee that carried it. A file drawer slammed. A printer coughed out another form. The world remained indifferent. That indifference hurt more than hostility. Someone looked up, recognition almost dawning before fear of involvement dimmed it again. Another officer turned away, convincing himself it was standard protocol. A rookie froze halfway through a sip of water, eyes wide, unsure which example to follow. Culture teaches through silence, faster than through lectures. Marcus's mind moved methodically. He cataloged details like evidence, tone, posture, procedure, violation. Years of command training mapped themselves over the moment. De-escalate. Preserve witness. Control your own pulse. He did all three. His stillness became defiance that no rule could punish. Inside that stillness, memory replayed in shards. His father's hands raised beside a broken taillight. A neighbor questioned on the same corner twice in 1 week. The academy instructor who warned him that perception would always arrive before introduction. He had thought endurance would rewrite that pattern. Endurance had only refined it. The grip on his arm tightened. A gesture meant to claim authority but betraying insecurity instead. Authority that cannot recognize legitimacy always performs louder. He let them guide him down the hall, every step an annotation in the unspoken manual of bias. The booking room waited, harsh light flattening every edge into clinical obedience, forms, cameras, a bench with the scars of previous occupants. His reflection in the security glass looked back without accusation, just a man measuring what progress actually means. Years of policy, diversity training and reform slogans condensed into one repeating truth. Systems evolve slower than those they harm. Minutes accumulated, heavy as wet cloth. No one asked for identification until procedure demanded it for the report. A search began, impersonal hands patting a pocket that held the answer. When the wallet emerged, the air changed temperature, a laminated card. Simple and absolute. Name, title, seal of the department, Chief Marcus Reed. The silence afterward wasn't apology. It was shock rearranging its posture. The officers stepped back without choreography, each realizing the hierarchy had inverted in an instant. Their mouths moved around words that would not come. The cuffs, still locked, gleamed under the light like proof of concept. This was what assumption looked like when printed in metal. Marcus watched them, not angry, not gentle, measuring their faces the way a teacher measures comprehension after a difficult lesson. He felt the tremor in his own hands. Small and human, the years of preparation had not made the moment painless. They had only taught him where to place the pain so it could speak later. The key turned. Pressure lifted, leaving faint red marks that pulsed with their own heartbeat. He flexed once, slow, deliberate, as if testing whether dignity had circulation. It did. The supervising captain arrived too late to stop the damage. Soon enough to witness it, he saw the card, saw the cuffs, saw the narrative collapsing under its own weight. He opened his mouth, but no protocol existed for this. Marcus straightened his collar, adjusted the line of his jacket, reclaimed the space around him inch by inch. He looked at no one and everyone at once. A lifetime of restraint coalesced into a single decision: to teach through presence rather than punishment. The room exhaled only when he walked out. Conversations restarted like engines after a stall, low and tentative. Some voices whispered versions of the story already mutating into rumor. By the time he reached the end of the corridor, the event had become legend, stripped of its discomfort, polished into something shareable. But he had felt the raw draft before the editing. Outside his future office, the door plate still carried the previous chief's name. He touched the metal lightly, the way one touches a scar that belongs to someone else, but still aches through the lineage of pain. The hallway behind him murmured, half shame, half curiosity. He let the noise fade. At his desk, the city map sprawled across the wall, a mosaic of zones and call signs and statistics, lines drawn to measure control. He saw in them the invisible borders that could never be printed: suspicion, privilege, fear. Those lines were the real precinct. He had inherited both. He sat, opened the top drawer, found the department seal, and pressed it onto the first memo of his tenure. The ink bled slightly where his cuff marks still reddened the skin. He smiled without warmth. Leadership begins where politeness ends. He knew tomorrow there would be a meeting, apologies, explanations about misunderstanding and protocol. He also knew change rarely arrives with speeches. It arrives with the quiet decision to behave differently in the same hallway next time. And somewhere deep inside, beneath composure and exhaustion, pride began to rise. Not pride in power, but in endurance that refused to be erased. The city outside shifted from morning to noon, sunlight now claiming the windows the rain had owned hours earlier. The reflection of his badge caught that light, scattering it across the desk like a promise still under construction. The story was not finished. The reckoning was next. Cut to black. Noon bled into afternoon without ceremony. The summons moved through the precinct faster than gossip ever could. Every officer, every clerk, every rank that had looked away that morning now gathered in the briefing room. Hum of the air conditioner sounded like a heartbeat trying to keep pace with guilt. At the front stood Marcus. Reed no podium, no notes, just the same uniform. That had been doubted hours before. The faint red circles of metal still visible around his wrists. He didn't hide them. He let the light catch them. Proof. That reform has a texture. He waited until the room settled into silence. Silence is a mirror. It forces everyone to meet their own reflection. When I walked through this building today, he began, voice low and level, I saw more than a misunderstanding. He didn't accuse. He narrated. It wasn't a matter of paperwork or clearance. It was instinct. The instinct to decide what someone is before you know who they are. A chair creaked. A throat cleared. No one spoke. He moved slowly across the front of the room, each step measured like punctuation. You are good officers, he said. But good isn't safe if it forgets to be aware. The phrase hung there. Neither sermon nor threat, just gravity. He raised one hand. The one that still bore the marks. These, he said, are not what disappoint me. What disappoints me is how easily it happened, and how many eyes watched it happen as if it were normal. The words cut cleanly. No theatrics. He turned, scanning faces, rookies, veterans. The captain who'd arrived too late, the two who had put the cuffs on, they couldn't meet his gaze. The badge, he continued, is supposed to be a promise, not armor. It can't protect us from the truth of our own behavior. He paused. The truth is simple. This department doesn't need more rules. It needs more awareness of what stands in the space between rule and respect. A flicker of movement near the back. One of the arresting officers shifted forward, as if to speak, then stopped. Marcus didn't give him the burden of words. He gave him release. I'm not here to punish anyone, he said. Punishment is easy. Growth is harder. What I expect is reflection and different choices the next time judgment arrives before evidence. He stepped back, letting silence return, longer this time. The room seemed to breathe out, tension turning into something quieter, shame maybe, or understanding beginning its slow construction. Then he added, softer, more human. You can't fix what you refuse to face. And you can't protect a community until you stop mistaking parts of it for threat. The captain looked up, voice rough with humility. Sir, what do you want us to do? Marcus met his eyes. Start by seeing, nothing more. He turned, picked up the small binder marked Chief's Office, transition notes, and closed it with a click that sounded louder than the cuffs had that morning. Every officer in that room would remember that sound, because in it was the shift from guilt to responsibility, from apology to action. He walked out first, not as the victim of their mistake, as the measure of their next chance. Behind him, chairs scraped softly. People stood, uncertain what protocol covered this kind of revelation. None did. Change has no manual. It begins with discomfort. The corridor outside stretched ahead, sunlight catching the badge on his chest. For the first time that day, the building seemed to recognize him, not by title, but by the gravity of his presence, cut to black. Morning in the city again. This time, sunlight entered the precinct first. It slid down hallway walls. Over the same photos that once stared out from a single history. Now watching a new one being written, coffee brewed. Voices were lower, slower, thoughtful. In the corner office, the nameplate had changed. Chief Marcus Reed. The letters gleamed as if they had been waiting for the light. He arrived before the others. Habit unchanged. A small ritual. Open blinds. Stack files. Glance at the map, but something inside the building had shifted since that day. People met each other's eyes longer. The receptionist greeted every uniform with a deliberate, good morning, the rookies asked. Questions they had once swallowed. Even silence had. Softened around the edges. He didn't talk about the cuffs anymore. He didn't need to. The story had become its own. Training passed in whispers between shifts. Retold in versions that always ended with the same moral. See first, judge later. He focused on the work. Policy audits, community programs. Pairing veterans with recruits from neighborhoods they once patrolled with suspicion. Change is not loud. It's a habit repeated until it replaces the old one. Outside, the precinct's flag snapped in the wind. Inside, a poster appeared near the sign-in board. Integrity means seeing beyond the badge. No memo announced it. Someone had just printed it and taped it there. That, he thought, was progress, change that doesn't ask permission. Weeks later, a journalist requested an interview about the incident. He declined the first 2 calls. On the third, he agreed on one condition: no dramatization, no editing for outrage. He wanted to speak about the quiet part, the system, not the spectacle. When the cameras rolled, he spoke like he did in the briefing room, calm, measured, human. It wasn't about embarrassment, he said. It was about recognition. If I could be mistaken for less than what I am inside these walls, imagine what that says to the people outside them. The interviewer asked, "Do you forgive them?" He smiled, not for the camera, but for himself. Forgiveness isn't the goal, he said. Understanding is. Forgiveness ends the story. Understanding begins the change. The clip aired that evening. By midnight, it had traveled far beyond city limits, shared, debated, quoted. Some saw it as a warning, others as hope. For Marcus, it was neither. It was documentation, proof that decency could still be news. Days folded into months. The precinct's record improved. Not dramatically, but steadily. Complaints fell. Community calls rose. More officers stayed after shifts to mentor the new ones. And every so often, someone would knock on the chief's door. Not for a reprimand, but to say quietly, "I saw it today, the moment before I judged. I stopped." Those were the reports that mattered. He logged them in memory, not on paper. On a late Friday evening, long after the building emptied, Marcus stood at his window again. The city glowed, steady, imperfect, alive. He thought of his father, of every invisible lesson that led here. He whispered, almost to the night, "We're still building." Behind him, on the desk, lay the old cuffs. He had kept them, polished and unlocked, resting beside a small plaque engraved with 2 words, "Never assume." They weren't trophies. They were reminders, tools of awareness, evidence that even a system made of laws is still made by people. The clock ticked past midnight. He turned off the light, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway sign, Chief's office. The darkness carried no threat now, only reflection. Outside, sirens passed again, but softer, less frantic. Somewhere another officer stopped a car, Another conversation began differently. Another assumption hesitated long enough to listen. Change had become contagious. Marcus walked out, his steps echoing through corridors that once misread his silence. Now they understood it. It was the sound of leadership that no longer needed to shout. And as the screen fades to black, a single line appears, quiet, deliberate. Would you have forgiven them if it were you?